In the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, not far from the modern city of Şanlıurfa, there is a rise in the landscape that looks ordinary at first glance. It does not stand sharply against the horizon. It does not resemble a fortress, a ruin, or even a traditional archaeological mound. For most of the 20th century, it was simply a rounded hill, covered in grass and scattered stones, quietly existing among fields and grazing land. Locals had known it for generations, archaeologists passed by it, and almost no one thought it mattered. The place is called Göbekli Tepe, which loosely translates to Potbelly Hill. The name itself reflects how little attention it once received. When survey teams first documented the area in the early 1960s, they noticed broken limestone fragments on the surface. Some stones appeared upright, but they were small, weathered, and partially buried. Based on what could be seen without digging, researchers concluded the site was likely a medieval cemetery. Similar stone markers existed elsewhere in the region. With that assumption in place, Göbekli Tepe was recorded, labeled, and then effectively ignored. This decision would shape the site's fate for decades. Because it was thought to be relatively recent and unremarkable, no excavation permits were issued, no funding followed. The hill continued to be ploughed at its edges by farmers, and its stones were occasionally reused for local construction. In archaeological terms, Göbekli Tepe became background noise, present but unimportant. That changed in the mid-1990s, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt encountered the site. Schmidt had worked for years at Neolithic settlements in the region and was deeply familiar with early stone tools and construction methods. When he arrived at Göbekli Tepe in 1994, he immediately sensed something was wrong with the old interpretation. The stones on the surface were not shaped like grave markers. They were too large, too carefully cut, and too deliberately placed. Schmidt later said that he knew within minutes that the hill was something extraordinary. What others had dismissed as debris, he recognized as the tops of massive carved pillars. He also noticed flint tools scattered across the surface, tools that belonged not to the medieval period, but to the deep Stone Age. This was not a cemetery, it was something far older. 1 year later, in 1995, Schmidt began the first systematic excavations at Göbekli Tepe under the German Archaeological Institute and the Şanlıurfa Museum. As workers carefully removed layers of soil, the hill began to reveal its secret. Beneath the earth were enormous T-shaped stone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing more than 15 tons. They were not random stones. They stood upright in carefully arranged circles and ovals, forming enclosed spaces that had been intentionally buried long ago. As more earth was cleared away, the scale of the site became clear. Each enclosure contained multiple pillars set into stone sockets, with 2 larger central pillars facing each other. The stones were finely carved from local limestone, quarried nearby, and shaped with stone tools. This alone was remarkable. But what truly changed everything was the dating. Radiocarbon analysis of organic material found within the fill layers produced dates around 9,600 BCE. That meant Göbekli Tepe was more than 11,000 years old. It predated Stonehenge by over 6,000 years. It was built thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt. And most importantly, it existed before the widespread adoption of agriculture. At the time these results were published, they sent quiet shockwaves through archaeology. According to the dominant model of human history, large-scale architecture was only possible after people settled down, domesticated plants and animals, and developed surplus food supplies. Farming, it was believed, came first. Monumental structures followed. Göbekli Tepe reversed that order. The people who built this site were hunter-gatherers. There is no evidence of domesticated crops or animals from the earliest layers, no permanent houses, no storage pits. Yet somehow these communities organized the labor to quarry, transport, carve, and erect stones that rival the weight of modern construction equipment. This raised uncomfortable questions. How did groups without metal tools shape limestone with such precision? How did they coordinate hundreds of people without written language, formal leadership, or permanent settlements? And perhaps most puzzling of all, why did they choose to do it at all? Göbekli Tepe does not appear to have been a village. There are no hearths, no living spaces, no signs of daily domestic life. Everything about the site suggests it served a special purpose. The fact that it sits on a high point in the landscape, visible from miles away, hints that it was meant to be seen and approached. It was a destination. Then there is the burial. After centuries of use, each enclosure was carefully filled in with rubble, broken tools, animal bones, and soil. This was not the result of collapse or abandonment. The pillars were deliberately buried while still standing. The site was sealed, enclosure by enclosure, and then left behind. For archaeologists, this was almost as strange as the construction itself. Why invest so much effort into building something only to bury it intentionally? The fill material preserved the site exceptionally well, but it also erased the builder's final intentions. By the early 2000s, Göbekli Tepe had become one of the most discussed archaeological discoveries in the world. Yet, despite international attention, only a small portion of the hill had been excavated. The rest remained underground, untouched, waiting. What makes this story resonate is not just the age of the site, but what it represents. Göbekli Tepe does not offer easy answers. It challenges long-held assumptions without clearly replacing them. It suggests that complex social behavior, shared belief systems, and large cooperative projects may have existed earlier than anyone expected. This is why Göbekli Tepe is often mentioned alongside discussions of unexplained ruins and ancient sites mainstream history struggles to categorize. Not because it is mysterious in a supernatural sense, but because it sits at the edge of what evidence can currently explain. The hill that no one took seriously turned out to be one of the most important archaeological sites ever found. And from the moment its true nature was revealed, a larger mystery took shape, one that would not be solved by a single excavation season or a single theory. How did people without farms, cities, or written plans come together to create one of humanity's earliest monumental complexes? And what did they believe was important enough to carve into stone, raise toward the sky, and then bury forever beneath the earth? Those questions begin here, on a quiet hill that was never meant to stay hidden. To understand why Göbekli Tepe is so difficult to explain, it helps to step back and picture the world as it was when the first stones were raised. This was not a world of farms, fenced fields, or permanent villages. Around 10,000 BCE, the last ice age was ending. Glaciers were retreating, temperatures were slowly rising. Across what is now southeastern Turkey, the land was changing, but it had not yet been shaped by agriculture. The region archaeologists later named the Fertile Crescent did not earn that title because people were farming it at the time. It earned it because nature itself was generous. Wild grasses grew thick across the hills. Stands of einkorn and emmer wheat spread naturally, untouched by human hands. Herds of gazelle moved across open plains. Aurochs, the massive wild ancestors of cattle, roamed the valleys. There were wild sheep, boar, birds, and countless smaller animals. Water sources were more plentiful than today, fed by melting ice and seasonal rains. For human groups living here, survival did not depend on planting crops or storing grain. Food was abundant if you knew when and where to look. People followed seasonal patterns, moving with animal migrations and harvesting wild plants when they ripened. Archaeologists describe these communities as mobile hunter-gatherers, but that term can feel misleading. They were not wandering aimlessly. They knew their landscapes deeply. They returned to the same places year after year. What they did not have were permanent homes. Excavated sites from this period show light structures, temporary shelters, and camps that were used seasonally. There is no clear evidence of fully domesticated plants or animals when Göbekli Tepe was first built. That transition would come later. At this moment in history, people lived close to the rhythms of the land, adjusting their movements to the environment rather than reshaping it. This is where the mystery begins to take shape. Göbekli Tepe does not fit comfortably into this picture. The stone enclosures are not small, they are not casual, they are massive, carefully designed constructions that required long-term planning. Quarrying limestone blocks weighing several tons is not a task that can be done quickly or by a handful of people working in spare moments between hunts. To cut these stones, workers used flint tools. The marks left behind show repeated, controlled strikes, shaping each pillar deliberately. After quarrying, the stones had to be moved uphill to the site. There were no wheels, no pack animals. Transport likely involved wooden sleds, ropes made from plant fibers, and sheer human effort. Once positioned, the pillars were set upright in prepared sockets and stabilized with stone packing. Every step of this process required cooperation, not just physical strength, but timing, communication, and shared purpose. This is what archaeologists often refer to as the labor problem of Göbekli Tepe. According to older models of human history, this kind of organized labor only appears after people settle down, produce surplus food, and develop social hierarchies. Kings, chiefs, or ruling elites are usually assumed to direct large construction projects. Yet at Göbekli Tepe there is no evidence of such structures, no palaces, no elite burials, no signs of permanent leadership roles passed down through generations. The people who built this site left behind stone tools and animal bones, but not the markers of ranked societies seen much later in history. So how was this possible? One idea researchers explore is seasonal gathering. The end of the Ice Age brought periods of abundance. During certain times of year, wild resources peaked. Gazelle migrations, in particular, could provide enormous amounts of meat in a short time. Archaeological evidence from Göbekli Tepe includes large quantities of animal bones, often from the same species, suggesting communal hunting and feasting events. These gatherings may have brought together multiple groups who normally lived apart. For a few weeks or months, hundreds of people could have assembled at a shared location. Food would have been plentiful enough to support large numbers, at least temporarily. During these gatherings, people could work together on construction, returning year after year to continue the same projects. This idea helps explain part of the puzzle, but not all of it. Seasonal gatherings are known from later periods as well, yet they rarely result in monuments on this scale. Coordinating construction across generations requires continuity. Knowledge of where stones were quarried, how they were shaped, and how enclosures were arranged had to be passed down over time. That suggests something more than occasional cooperation. It points toward shared traditions, shared beliefs, and shared reasons for returning to the same hill again and again. Importantly, archaeologists do not see evidence that Göbekli Tepe was built by a hidden advanced culture or a lost civilization. There are no tools or materials out of place for the period. Everything found at the site fits within known Stone Age technology. The mystery is not about impossible tools, it is about unexpected organization. For decades, the story of early human history followed a simple path. First came farming. Farming led to permanent settlements. Settlements led to social hierarchy, religion, and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe disrupts that sequence. It suggests that shared belief systems, or at least shared symbolic behavior, may have existed before agriculture, not after it. Some researchers have proposed that places like Göbekli Tepe were catalysts for change. The need to support repeated large gatherings may have encouraged people to experiment with managing wild grains more intensively. Over time, those experiments could have led to domestication. In this view, agriculture was not the starting point of complex society, but a response to it. Others urge caution. They point out that Göbekli Tepe may represent a rare cultural development, not a universal pattern. Archaeology often deals with incomplete evidence. What we see may be an exception that survived by chance, while other similar sites were lost to erosion, later construction, or rising sea levels. Just as underwater archaeology reveals sunken structures that reshape our understanding of coastal history, buried sites like Göbekli Tepe remind us how much remains unseen beneath the surface of the land. What researchers broadly agree on is this: the people who built Göbekli Tepe were not simple in the way older models assumed. They were capable of long-term planning, symbolic expression, and large-scale cooperation. But exactly how those abilities were organized without farms, cities, or formal governments remains unclear. This gap in understanding is what keeps Göbekli Tepe at the center of discussion. It is not ignored by mainstream history, but it resists easy placement within it. Existing models bend under its weight, yet no new model fully replaces them. By the time the first enclosure was finished, the builders had already changed the story of humanity's past. They showed that people living close to nature, without permanent homes or domesticated crops, could still imagine and create something lasting, something that required patience, coordination, and meaning. Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that our ancestors were capable of more than we once believed. And it leaves us with a quiet, unsettling question that lingers as we move forward in the story. If people at the very edge of the Stone Age could build something like this, what else about early human history are we still struggling to see? By the time the first enclosures at Göbekli Tepe emerged from the soil, it was clear that this was not a rough or accidental construction. The stones were not scattered or reused. They were placed with care, aligned within defined spaces that followed repeating patterns. Each enclosure formed a circle or oval, its edges marked by tall limestone pillars set into stone sockets. At the center stood two larger pillars facing one another, dominating the space. These central stones are the most striking feature of the site. They are shaped like a capital T rising several meters above the floor. At first glance, the form seems abstract. But when researchers looked closer, subtle details began to appear. Carved into the stone are long, thin arms running down the sides, ending in hands that meet at the front. Some pillars show belts carved around the waist, with small objects hanging from them. In a few cases, a simple loincloth shape is visible. Taken together, these details suggest something important. The pillars are not just stones. They appear to represent stylized human figures, not portraits of individuals, but symbolic forms, tall, faceless beings standing watch over the enclosure. Their lack of facial features is striking. It suggests that identity was not tied to personal appearance, but to something more abstract. The craftsmanship involved in creating these pillars is remarkable. The limestone surfaces are smooth, with sharp edges and clean lines. This was not rushed work. Each pillar required time, skill, and repetition. The builders understood their material well. They knew how to split stone, how to shape it, and how to carve reliefs that would endure. Those reliefs are where the site becomes even more intriguing. Across the pillars and stone walls are carved images of animals. Foxes appear often, their bodies stretched across the stone as if in motion. Snakes twist along the surfaces, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Wild boars show their tusks, birds spread their wings, scorpions, spiders, and insects are rendered with surprising clarity. These images are not random. Certain animals appear again and again across different enclosures, carved in similar styles. What is missing is just as important. There are almost no images of plants, no landscapes, no scenes of daily life. The carvings focus almost entirely on animals, many of them dangerous or difficult to hunt. This choice feels deliberate. Archaeologists agree that these carvings were not casual decoration. The repetition, placement, and consistency suggest symbolic meaning, but what that meaning was remains uncertain. Without written language, interpretation relies on context and comparison, and that leaves room for debate. Some researchers propose that the animals represent clan symbols. In this view, different groups may have identified themselves with specific animals, carving their symbols into shared ritual spaces. Others see the animals as representations of danger and power, reflecting the challenges of life in the wild. Predators and venomous creatures would have commanded respect and caution, perhaps serving as reminders of forces beyond human control. There are also interpretations that focus on transformation and death. Many of the animals carved at Göbekli Tepe are scavengers or creatures associated with liminal spaces between life and death, land and sky. Birds, especially vultures, were known in later Neolithic cultures to play roles in funerary practices. Some scholars suggest that the site may have been connected to early beliefs about the afterlife or the movement of souls. A few researchers have explored broader cosmological ideas. They note patterns in the placement of animals and speculate about connections to seasonal cycles or celestial events. These interpretations are cautious, grounded in observation rather than speculation, but they remain unconfirmed. Without texts or oral traditions preserved in material form, these meanings are difficult to pin down. What nearly all researchers agree on is that Göbekli Tepe was a place of ritual. But ritual is a broad term. It does not tell us what people believed, only that belief played a central role. The physical layout of the enclosures supports this idea. There are no hearths, no cooking areas, no trash pits filled with everyday waste, no signs of long-term habitation. People did not live here. They came here for a purpose, stayed for a time, and left again. This sets Göbekli Tepe apart from later Neolithic sites, where ritual spaces are often integrated into settlements. Here, the sacred space stands alone. The entire hill appears to have been dedicated to something other than daily survival. Then there is the question of access. The enclosures are inward-facing with tall pillars creating enclosed spaces. This design may have controlled movement and visibility, shaping how people entered and experienced the site. Standing between the central pillars would have been a powerful experience. The scale of the stones, the carved animals, and the surrounding silence would have left a strong impression. And yet, after centuries of use, something unexpected happened. Each enclosure was filled in. The builders did not simply walk away. They did not let the site decay naturally. Instead, they deliberately buried it. Stone by stone, the spaces were filled with rubble, broken tools, animal bones, and soil. The pillars remained standing as they disappeared beneath the earth, sealed in place. This act of burial is one of the most puzzling aspects of Göbekli Tepe. It required almost as much effort as building the enclosures in the first place. The fill material was not random. It appears to have been collected and placed intentionally, suggesting a planned and meaningful act. Why bury something that took generations to create? Some researchers believe the burial marked the end of a ritual cycle. Perhaps each enclosure had a lifespan, after which it was closed and replaced by a new one nearby. Others suggest that changes in belief systems or social organization made the site no longer relevant. There is also the possibility that environmental shifts played a role, altering migration patterns and food availability. What is clear is that the burial was not accidental. It was not caused by natural disasters or gradual neglect. It was a conscious decision carried out carefully. This deliberate concealment has had an unexpected result. Like sunken structures preserved beneath the sea, Göbekli Tepe was protected by the very act that hid it. The fill material shielded the stones from erosion and damage, allowing details to survive for over 11,000 years. In that sense, the site shares something with ancient ocean discoveries uncovered through underwater archaeology. Both remain intact because they were removed from everyday exposure. But unlike submerged civilizations or lost underwater cities, Göbekli Tepe was buried by its own builders. The choice to hide it came from within the culture itself. That choice leaves us with symbols but no explanations. The stones tell us that meaning mattered deeply to the people who carved them. The repetition of forms, the care in design, and the effort invested all point to shared ideas and shared values. But those ideas were never written down. Whatever stories once accompanied these carvings have vanished. Klaus Schmidt often emphasized that Göbekli Tepe was not a puzzle to be solved quickly, but a message from a distant past that requires patience. Each excavation season reveals more detail, but also more questions. The symbols remain silent in the ways that matter most. Standing before these stones today, one is reminded that human history is not a straight line of progress. It is layered, folded, and sometimes intentionally hidden. Göbekli Tepe does not shout its meaning. It whispers it through stone and shadow. The builders left behind evidence of intention, belief, and coordination on a scale that should not exist according to older models of history. And yet, it does exist. The enclosures stand as proof that something important happened here, something that shaped the lives and beliefs of the people who returned to this hill again and again. The symbols speak, but their language is lost. And in that silence, the mystery of Göbekli Tepe deepens, inviting us to look closer, not for answers, but for understanding. By the early 2000s, Göbekli Tepe had moved from a surprising discovery to a serious challenge. It did not offer a neat solution to a long-standing question. Instead, it forced archaeologists to pause and re-examine ideas that had shaped the field for generations. The site did not break the story of early human history. It bent it. For much of the 20th century, the sequence seemed clear. Humans first learned to farm. Farming created food surplus. Surplus allowed people to settle, specialize, and build complex societies. Religion, art, and monumental architecture came later as products of stability. This order was taught in textbooks, reinforced by excavations and rarely questioned. Göbekli Tepe arrived like a quiet contradiction. Here was a monumental ritual site built by people who were not farmers, who did not live in cities, and who left no signs of political hierarchy. The stones did not fit the expected timeline. They suggested that shared belief, ritual behavior, and large-scale cooperation existed before agriculture, not after it. One of the most discussed ideas to emerge from this contradiction was proposed by Klaus Schmidt himself. He suggested that places like Göbekli Tepe may have played a role in the birth of agriculture. In this view, ritual came first. People gathered for ceremonies, feasts, and symbolic activities. Over time, the pressure to feed these gatherings may have encouraged early experiments with managing wild plants and animals. The logic is careful, not dramatic. Seasonal gatherings would have required reliable food sources. If wild grains were harvested repeatedly in the same areas, people may have begun to protect them, replant them, or favor certain traits without fully realizing they were domesticating crops. The same could apply to animals that were hunted and managed in predictable ways. Support for this idea comes from timing. The earliest evidence for domesticated wheat appears in the same general region, only a few centuries after Göbekli Tepe was first used. This does not prove a direct cause, but it suggests a possible connection. Ritual may have created new social needs, and those needs may have reshaped how people interacted with the environment. Not everyone agrees. Many archaeologists urge caution, and their reasons are grounded in method, not resistance to change. Göbekli Tepe is extraordinary, but it is also a single site. Rewriting the entire story of human development based on one example risks oversimplification. Human history is uneven. Cultures experiment, adapt, and sometimes abandon paths that do not spread widely. From this perspective, Göbekli Tepe may represent a rare cultural experiment, a moment when groups invested heavily in symbolic construction without transitioning immediately into farming societies. The fact that the site was eventually buried and abandoned could even suggest that this experiment reached a natural end. These researchers point out that agriculture emerged independently in multiple regions of the world, including East Asia, Mesoamerica, and the Andes. Each followed its own timeline and pattern. Göbekli Tepe cannot explain all of them. At most, it offers insight into one region at one moment in time. What makes the debate productive is that it is not framed as a battle between right and wrong. Instead, it reflects a field responding to new evidence. Archaeology is slow by design. Claims are tested against material remains, dates, and comparisons. Göbekli Tepe has passed those tests, but its meaning is still being refined. As excavations continued, another important development added depth to the discussion. Archaeologists began to identify smaller sites in the surrounding region with similar features. Places like Karahan Tepe, Nevaluchori, and other pre-pottery Neolithic sites showed carved pillars, symbolic reliefs, and communal structures. These sites are not copies of Göbekli Tepe. They are smaller, less elaborate, and often more damaged. But their existence suggests that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a broader cultural landscape, one where symbolic architecture played a role in community life. Still, none of these sites match Göbekli Tepe in scale or preservation. The deliberate burial that once puzzled researchers now appears to be the reason it survived so well. In a way, it shares a strange similarity with sunken structures preserved underwater. Just as submerged civilizations and lost underwater cities are protected by layers of sediment and water, Göbekli Tepe was shielded by the earth itself. This comparison is not about location, but about preservation. In underwater archaeology, ancient ocean discoveries often remain intact because they were removed from daily human activity. Göbekli Tepe experienced something similar on land. Its builders sealed it away, freezing a moment of human behavior that would otherwise have eroded into fragments. The debate around Göbekli Tepe has also influenced how archaeologists think about belief systems. Rather than viewing religion as a byproduct of settled life, some now consider it a driving force. Shared rituals may have helped large groups cooperate without formal authority. Symbolic spaces may have created a sense of identity that extended beyond family or clan. This does not require gods in the modern sense. Belief can take many forms. It can be expressed through shared stories, animal symbols, or repeated actions performed in specific places. Göbekli Tepe shows evidence of all three, even if the details remain out of reach. At the same time, researchers remain careful not to project later religious ideas backward. There is no evidence of temples in the way ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia understood them. The site reflects something earlier, less defined, but no less meaningful. As new findings are published, interpretations continue to shift. Some ideas gain support, others fade. This is not confusion, it is the normal process of science working with incomplete evidence. Göbekli Tepe has not divided archaeology into opposing camps. It has expanded the conversation. What it has clearly done is expose how limited earlier assumptions were. For a long time, complexity was equated with farming, cities, and written records. Göbekli Tepe suggests that complexity can exist without those markers. Human societies may have been capable of organization and symbolic thought long before they reshaped the landscape with fields and walls. This realization has ripple effects beyond one site. It encourages archaeologists to look again at other places once dismissed or misdated. It raises questions about how many sites were overlooked because they did not fit expected patterns. Just as underwater archaeology has revealed unexplained ruins beneath coastlines once thought empty, land archaeology now recognizes that what lies buried can challenge what lies written. Göbekli Tepe remains unsolved, but that is not a failure, it is a turning point. It marks the moment when the story of early humanity became more complex, less linear, and more human. The site does not tell us exactly how agriculture began. It does not explain why belief took the forms it did. It does not offer a single answer that ties everything together. What it offers instead is evidence that early humans were thinkers, planners, and collaborators in ways we are still learning to understand. In that sense, Göbekli Tepe is not just an ancient site, it is a reminder that history is not finished, that the ground beneath our feet still holds unanswered questions, and that sometimes a single hill can change how we see the entire past. The debate it sparked continues not because scholars are uncertain, but because the evidence deserves careful thought. Göbekli Tepe did not close a chapter in archaeology. It opened one. Today, Göbekli Tepe sits quietly on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, protected by a sweeping roof and surrounded by farmland. At first glance, it looks calm and contained, almost finished. But the truth is the opposite. What we see today is only a small fraction of the site. Careful estimates from the German Archaeological Institute suggest that less than 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Beneath the ground, hidden under layers of soil and stone, dozens of structures are still waiting. This is one of the most important facts to understand about the mystery. Göbekli Tepe is not a puzzle with missing pieces. It is a puzzle where most of the pieces are still buried. Geophysical surveys, including ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry, have revealed circular and oval shapes beneath the surface. These shapes closely resemble the enclosures already uncovered, with their massive T-shaped pillars and carefully arranged stone walls. Some scans suggest there could be more than 20 additional enclosures still underground. Each one may hold carvings, tools, or architectural details that could change how researchers interpret the site. So why not dig faster? Why not uncover everything at once? The answer is preservation. Göbekli Tepe is over 11,000 years old. Once stone is exposed to air, rain, temperature changes, and microorganisms, deterioration begins almost immediately. Carvings that survived millennia underground can erode within decades if not protected. Excavation is not just about removing soil, it is about recording every layer, every object, and every relationship between materials. Once that context is lost, it can never be recovered. Archaeologists often compare this process to underwater archaeology, where ancient shipwrecks or sunken structures must be documented slowly to avoid collapse or decay. In both cases, patience protects knowledge, rushing risks turning a deep historical mystery into shallow ruins. Because excavation moves slowly, many of the biggest questions about Göbekli Tepe remain open. The first is purpose. Why was this place built at all? There is no clear evidence of permanent housing, cooking hearths, or daily domestic life. Instead, the effort went into monumental stone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons, carved with animals like foxes, snakes, boars, and birds. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who led excavations for nearly 2 decades, believed Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center, a place people gathered for ceremonies rather than a settlement where they lived. But even that raises more questions. What kind of rituals required this scale of construction? Were they seasonal gatherings? Did they mark important events? social bonds, or shared beliefs. The symbols carved into the stone do not tell a simple story. They appear symbolic, but their meaning is still unclear. Then there is the question of organization. Who planned this site? Hunter-gatherer groups are often described as small and mobile, yet Göbekli Tepe required long-term coordination. Quarrying stone, shaping pillars, transporting them uphill, and placing them with precision would have required leadership, shared purpose, and repeated cooperation over generations. Some researchers suggest that the act of building Göbekli Tepe may itself have helped create more complex social structures. In this view, organized religion or shared ritual came before agriculture, not after it. The need to gather people and feed them during construction may even have encouraged early farming in the surrounding region. This idea remains debated, but it has pushed archaeologists to rethink old assumptions. Another unresolved issue is time. Radiocarbon dating shows that Göbekli Tepe was used and modified over many centuries, from roughly 9,600 BCE to around 8,200 BCE. Enclosures were built, used, then intentionally filled in, and new ones were constructed nearby. This was not a single project. It was a tradition passed down across generations, which leads to the most puzzling question of all. Why was it deliberately buried? Unlike sites abandoned due to disaster or invasion, Göbekli Tepe was carefully filled with stone fragments, soil, and animal bones. The pillars were not knocked down in chaos, they were surrounded and covered with intention. Some archaeologists believe this burial was a form of ritual closure, a way of retiring old structures as beliefs or practices changed. Others suggest environmental or social shifts made the site less relevant over time. What is striking is that the burial helped preserve the site. By covering it, the builders protected the carvings from erosion and destruction. Whether intentional or not, this act allowed Göbekli Tepe to survive into the present almost like a sealed time capsule. Mainstream history does not ignore Göbekli Tepe. It is taught, studied, and discussed in academic journals and documentaries. But it does challenge neat timelines. For decades, history followed a simple sequence. Humans settled, invented agriculture, and then developed religion and monuments. Göbekli Tepe complicates that story. It suggests that shared belief and symbolic construction may have come first. Because of this, its implications are still being absorbed. Textbooks mention it, but often briefly. The site does not overturn everything we know, but it forces revisions, and revisions take time. It is tempting to frame Göbekli Tepe as a deep mystery hidden from the world, but that is not quite right. The mystery remains because archaeology works slowly and because the past rarely speaks clearly. Evidence emerges in fragments. Interpretations shift as new data appears. There is no single discovery moment that suddenly explains everything. In that way, Göbekli Tepe is similar to other ancient discoveries, whether lost underwater cities, unexplained ruins, or submerged civilizations studied through underwater archaeology. The deeper researchers look, the more complex the picture becomes. Each answer leads to new questions. Standing at the site today, it is hard not to feel that most of the story is still underground. Beneath the soil are structures no one has seen in 12,000 years, symbols no one has interpreted, choices made by people whose names we will never know. Göbekli Tepe does not rewrite human history overnight. It does something quieter and more important. It reminds us that history is incomplete, that the early chapters of our story were not simple or primitive, and that sometimes the most important discoveries are not about finding something new, but realizing how much we have yet to understand. The past is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because we are still learning how to listen.